Good evening, and welcome back to the Poe Museum. We've been getting some questions from Poe people out there who want to know our opinion on the new film, The Pale Blue Eye, which features Edgar Allan Poe. But you can find lots of reviews of that movie out there online. So what we wanted to do was give you a review specifically of the Edgar Allan Poe performance. And that will be the focus of tonight's installment of the Curator's Crypt. One of the things that strikes people right off the bat is the Southern accent that Harry Melling uses in this role. And it's actually more accurate than not. Although Poe was born in Boston, he wouldn't have had a Northern accent because he was orphaned at the age of 2 and grew up in Richmond, Virginia, where he would have been surrounded by the Tidewater, Virginia accent. Now, to Melling's credit, he's English, and he's doing a pretty good job of doing a southeastern United States accent. I think he's a little bit deep south, maybe more foghorn leghorn.
Now, who's responsible for this unwarranted attack on my person?
Whereas Poe was more of a Tidewater, Virginia accent. So when he read The Raven, Poe would have said, "Quoth the Raven, nevermore." Probably would have left off the concluding R sound and nevermore. But otherwise, I think that Melling did a good job of capturing Poe's accent. As far as the clothing's concerned, overall, I think they did a fairly good job. We have surviving engravings which show what West Point cadets would have worn back then. So the costume designers seem to do their research on that part. When it comes to some of the other clothing, we can nitpick over details like maybe the waistcoat's the wrong length, the coats might be the wrong cut, some of the pants might be off the shoes. But what really sticks out is usually the collars. Back then, a lot of times, the collars went right up to the chin. You barely had room to breathe, and that's when you see in a lot of the portraits and engravings from that time. I think the clothing is overall good, but I'm not a clothing expert. Otherwise, I wouldn't dress like this. We don't have any photos of Poe in his West Point uniform, unfortunately, but we do have photos of the greatcoat that he wore while he was there. Because after he left West Point, he kept wearing it, and it shows up in 2 different photographs taken of him. So you can see exactly what his West Point greatcoat would have looked like. Next part is Poe's age. Now, he's portrayed in this film by an actor who's in his 30s, but Poe would have been quite that old yet. He was 21 years old when he went to West Point. And in the film, he does reference being older than his fellow cadets, and he was. Because by this time, Poe had already gone to University of Virginia, which he attended for a year. Then he was an enlisted man in the U.S. Army for 2 years. And only after that did he get his appointment to West Point. So he started out a little bit later than the rest of them. He wouldn't quite have fit in with him. Another thing people look for is that mustache. Harry Melling does not have a mustache in this film because Poe didn't have a mustache. He didn't actually grow that famous mustache until he was about 35 years old. But that's when most of the photographs were taken of him, so all but one of the photographs of Poe shows him with his mustache. The earliest known photograph shows Poe when he's about 33 years old, coincidentally the same age as the actor who portrays him in the film. And this is what Poe looked like without his mustache. Now, in one scene of the film, we have the Poe character reciting a raunchy poem to some of his classmates. This is something that Poe actually did. He was known while he was there for reciting ridiculous poems making fun of his commanding officers. But they're not the poem that we see in the movie. That's an entirely new poem. We only have a surviving fragment of one of the poems that he wrote while he was at West Point, and he's making fun of one of the officers named Joe Locke. So this is what he said. As for Locke, he is all in my eye. May the devil right soon for his soul call. He never was known to lie. In bed at reveille roll call. John Locke was a notable name. Joe Locke is a greater in short. The former was well known to fame, but the latter's well known to report. Okay, so it's not funny, but Poe's fellow cadets thought that stuff was hilarious, and a lot of them chipped in to help him get a book of his poetry published. This is it, right here. It's Poems of Edgar Apo. It's inside of here. There's only a few surviving copies, and the Poe Museum is lucky enough to have one in the original paper wrapper, which the cadets actually complained about. They were hoping something nicer, maybe with a leather wrapper. And when we look inside, this was paid for and dedicated to the U.S. Corps of Cadets. What did they think of it? Well, if you watch previous episodes of the Curator's Crypt, you know they hated it. Right here, the inscription of one of the first owners says, "This book is a damn cheat." It said they threw most of their copies in the Hudson River, just get rid of them. So we're lucky this one survived. Next up, there's a part in the film where the Poe character mentions that nobody will miss him in class because he skipped so much class anyway. That's actually correct. In fact, Poe skipped so many classes, he got kicked out. He was court-martialed for gross neglect of duty and disobedience of orders. And he did this on purpose. He hated West Point. He wanted to get kicked out. And we can tell the character in the film hates West Point and he wants out of there. And Poe could not resign without his foster father's permission. His foster father wasn't about to give him permission. So Poe said the only way out is to get kicked out. And that's what he did. But we do know the kind of things he would have studied if he had gone to class, because we have some pages of diagrams from a textbook that was in use at West Point while Poe was there. So he was studying physics and engineering and astronomy and navigation. And apparently was pretty good at it until he decided he'd rather just get out of there and start his life as a professional writer. And one of the rules at West Point at the time was you were not allowed to have any poem or book unrelated to your studies in your possession while you were there. So obviously Poe is not going to fit in with that sort of environment. And then there's a part in the film where Poe's character is beaten up and pinned to the ground by another cadet. Not accurate. In fact, when Poe was growing up, he represented his academy in boxing and actually was pretty well known as a boxer. There's a description of the teenage Poe getting into a fight with a much bigger kid. And Poe was always kind of a thin, wiry fellow, probably about average height for the time. He was 5'8", which is probably below average for today, but above average back then. And it said that he let the other kid beat him up for the longest time until the big kid got winded and had to stop and take a break. And when he's trying to catch his breath, that's when Poe just pops up off the ground and beats him up and said, I was just let him wear himself out to make it easy for me. And Poe did like a good fight, and there's description of him throughout his career getting into fistfights with different people. He's kind of a hothead. So in real life, I think Poe would have beaten up the other guy, and Christian Bale wouldn't have had to step in and rescue him. Of course, Poe was rescued by Batman, so that's pretty good, because as we know from a previous episode of the Curator's Crypt, in the limited comics series Batman Nevermore, Batman and Poe join forces. So if you want to see a live action version of the comic series Batman Nevermore, you probably shouldn't contact us because we don't really have anything to do with that stuff. But maybe somebody at DC can help you out with that. So in conclusion, overall, I thought Harry Melling did a pretty good job as portraying Poe. He had the mannerisms down, the accent down, pretty much the look. So on a scale from John Cusack to Jeffrey Combs, I'd put him up right near Dennis O'Hare from American Masters Buried Alive. So that's pretty good there. So if you'd like more of The Pale Blue Eye, why not get the original novel by Lewis Bayard? We've got a couple copies right here in the Poe Museum Reference Library. And if you'd like to help us preserve precious Poe pieces like this rare first edition of Poems of Edgar A. Poe, published by the U.S. Corps of Cadets, why not support the Poe Museum by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Poe Museum. And if you'd like to help spread the word about what the Poe Museum's doing here, please like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, thanks for joining us, and here's some gratuitous footage of Pluto, the Poe Museum cat, trying to get inside of a drawer.